Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Jessel Noor in Baltimore. Iceland's Independence Party, currently the junior party in the country's governing coalition, has come out ahead after a parliamentary vote on Saturday, October 29th, in an election called after the Prime Minister resigned as a result of the Panama Papers scandal this year. The Independence Party were followed by the left-green movement and the new anti-establishment Pirate Party, which came in third. This is Pirate Party leader Birgitta Jónsdóttir.
The message is that the Pirate Party is going to change 5 fundamental things. We want to honor the wish of the nation from the referendum a few years ago about the new constitution and to put that on the agenda again. We want to change the fishery system so that we can move our collective assets into the collective fund so that we can resurrect the healthcare sector. But we also want to change the system so that they become more functional and more humane towards the people that need to live by them. Because it is important, no matter who asks for this job, to be a representative, that we are always aware of that we are here in service.
The Pirate Party had been riding a wave of anger against the establishment in a country that was one of the hardest hit in the 2008 financial crisis when its banking system collapsed, hitting thousands of savers. It's still too early to say, however, which party or parties would get the mandate to form the next government. The center-right Independence Party won almost 30% of the vote, and the left-green movement got 15.9%, while the Pirate Party was third with 13.4%. Well, now joining us from Reykjavik, Iceland, is Paul Fontaine, news editor and reporter for the Reykjavik Grapevine. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So give us your response to how the election played out. Some polls had the Pirate Party doing much better than third place, where they ended up. And you know, in the introduction, I mentioned some of the anger they were riding and some of the policies that they were supporting, taking a very left, even radical position on even issues such as giving citizenship to NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden.
Well, I think the results of the election reflect a number of different facets of Icelandic society. It's correct, as you point out, that there was a lot of anger towards the establishment in the wake of the 2008 financial crash, as well as the Panama Papers scandal. However, the Independence Party is a very old and very established party in this country. They have a significant number of their voters are what we call hereditary voters, in that you have voters who vote for them simply because their parents did and their parents before them did. It's a very old-line, blue blood conservative party. At the same time, there have been factions within the right in Iceland, and we saw that play out in the Restoration Party, which is another center-right party. However, unlike the Independence Party, they're in favor of joining the European Union. So a lot of dissatisfied voters from the Independence Party and the Progressives who might have put their vote towards a pro-EU left, put their votes into the Restoration Party, and as we saw, that did very well for them. I mean, they're a brand new party, they have no seats in Parliament, and now they have 7. So while, yes, there were a great number of people who put their dissatisfaction with the status quo towards the Pirates and the Left Greens, who also did incredibly well for themselves. The right wing in Iceland is still very much established in this country, and it's an uphill battle.
And talk about what's next, because no party got a majority. So there's going to be a process now within the next 10 days, or maybe sooner, maybe perhaps longer, that some parties will have to come together and form a coalition government. Talk about what this process involves and what that process may result in.
Okay. Well, Iceland's parliamentary system, like a lot of European parties, will have a ruling coalition, which is almost always 2 or more parties, and an opposition, which is everyone else. Since no one party, as you point out, got a clean majority of Iceland's 63-seat parliament, they're going to have to talk with one another. Who leads the next coalition is ultimately in the hands of our president, as he is the head of state. Now, in terms of deciding who is the party that the president chooses, there's a number of factors to consider. It's not just who got the most seats, which in this case is the Independence Party, but also another factor that's also included in that is who increased their seats the most. The Restoration Party going from 0 to 7, they've argued we should be leading the next coalition. The Pirates more than tripling their numbers. The Left Greens showing an incredible upswing in support just before the elections. They've argued, by the same logic, that they should be involved in this as well. Icelanders are typically allergic to ruling coalitions that have more than 2 parties, but we may be going in that direction anyway. So the way the breakdown is now, yes, the next coalition might be led by the Independence Party by their sheer number of seats, or we could have what's known as a minority government, wherein we would have the Pirates, the Left Greens, the Restoration Party, also involved in this, with the support of the Social Democrats and Bright Future, which is a center-left party, who would be supporting the ruling coalition even though they're not technically in it. I know it sounds a little complicated, but this is really, when we have 7 parties now coming into a 63-seat parliament, we have to get a little creative with how we form a ruling coalition, if we even form a ruling coalition at all. I mean, there is precedent for what's known as a national government in which all the parties have to share all the power together and try to work out something resembling consensus when it comes to passing legislation.
So that's certainly going to be different than what most of our viewers are used to in the U.S. when you have 2 major parties and third parties have limited political power, especially on a national level. So I wanted to ask you, we know that Iceland has been sort of creating a new crowdsourced constitution, which the previous government had blocked its implementation. Talk a little bit about what this would involve, and is there a chance for it to be implemented now, depending on what kind of government is formed over the next few days?
I'd say so. First, one caveat is that the constitutional draft was not crowdsourced. It was written by an elected 23-member constitutional committee. They, in turn, posted this draft on a website where they fielded questions and commentary and suggestions from the general public, and that feedback was in turn folded in to the eventual constitutional draft, which was submitted to Parliament. It died in Parliament in 2012 over a number of disagreements in terms of different articles of this proposed constitution that some parties liked, some parties didn't like so much, and since they couldn't reach any consensus, it just kind of fizzled out. This time around, if we do end up with this minority government involving the Pirates and the Left Greens and the Restoration Party et al., that process might be a bit easier. However, by Icelandic law, what needs to happen if you adopt a new constitution is that Parliament needs to be immediately dissolved, and we need to have new elections. The only way to get around that would be to pass legislation that changes that legislation, making that requirement. So either way, even if there's complete 100% political will to adopt a new constitution, it's still going to be a fairly complex and messy process, as democracy usually is.
And so, Iceland was one of the hardest hit countries from the 2008 financial crash. It was also one of the few, or maybe only, country that jailed bankers as a result of it. And we saw the prime ministers had to resign this year because of the Panama Papers. Talk about how the financial crises have impacted the election and going forward as well.
The 2008 financial crash definitely had an impact on these elections. I had been living here at the time for that, and what's interesting about the crash, and one thing that needs to be understood, is that while if you were to read articles in the international press, you might be under the impression that Icelanders are the sorts of people who love to motivate, and they love to organize, and they love to protest. It wasn't always this way. When Iceland was roped into the coalition of the willing in the invasion of Iraq, nobody protested. And I used to ask Icelanders, why is no one protesting this? Everyone I talk to seems to be angry about it. And I was just told, Icelanders don't protest. We're not that kind of people. Only hippies and radicals protest. But the financial crash changed the national character. And that's very significant in that the change that occurred was Icelanders learned that they can organize, they can perform a mass action, they can have a real-time effect. And Icelanders have not forgotten that lesson. And so they've basically been riding that momentum since then. We've had protests for massive protests for a number of different things. The Panama Papers saw the largest protest in our history, with about 10% of the population descended on Parliament, calling for the dissolution of the government. We had another protest shortly before then, which was also massive, not quite 10%, but still fairly massive, simply because the foreign minister sent a letter to Brussels saying Iceland doesn't want to join the EU anymore. Icelanders wanted to have a referendum on this, and so they protested. And so that change in spirit, that change in democratic involvement, that change in attitude that one person can make a difference and that you can actually organize people to have a direct influence in the government was a sentiment and a spirit that was very much in line with the Pirate Party. And I think that that contributed significantly to the level of support that they got in this election.
All right, Paul LaFontaine, thanks so much for joining us, and we'll certainly keep following developments as Iceland works to create a governing coalition or one of the other possibilities that you had discussed. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, sir.
And thank you for joining us at the Real News Network.